Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Amazon News and Trends. This is for June 2021. I have with me today Nate Hogel, who's taken over this role for Kyle. So Nate will be our guy going forward to focus on Amazon news and trends. Nate, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a bunch of updates today. We have quite a few in kind of the general other bucket, in particular around Prime Day.
Yeah.
We have some in content and catalog, and then a few in advertising as well. So let's just go ahead and dive into it. So the first kind of big update in general and other is Prime Day Insights. We have quite a bit here, so we may want to kind of break it out into a few points, but it's up to you, Nate. Prime Day Insights.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at June, the main thing in Amazon world is Prime Day. And so I think that's going to be the most of our focus today. There's a lot of information coming out. I think we're still waiting on most official numbers from Amazon. So a lot of this is somewhat anecdotal based on some industry estimations and then just information and data that we got from our own client base. So we can jump into that. I think kind of at a macro level to start off, Prime Day was still a record day, as it has been for Amazon for the past 4 years. But I think despite that, there was experienced lower growth, which I think is interesting because we've kind of waited for that to happen to some degree. With Amazon just blowing these crazy record numbers out year after year, you kind of are left wondering what's the ceiling. I don't know that we hit the ceiling this year. I think there's a lot of macroeconomic factors that may have played into a lower growth number than what was experienced last fall. But by and large, that's what we saw. We saw lower engagement from the customer base. We saw lower engagement from a lot of brands for a variety of reasons. And just an overall kind of a suppressed anticipation and excitement around the holiday, I think, than what we've seen in the past for a variety of different reasons. A lot of things that we can get into from a macro level, from supply chain issues to constraints on budgets to the COVID reopening of economies. I think there's a lot that could be affecting what we saw. Talking with a lot of our clients and talking with some of our client teams, brands have to be a lot more discerning with what they're promoting. They have limited inventory a lot of times if they're having their inventory produced overseas. So they have a lot more discretion when they're placing their promotional dollars and planning out their calendar. And I think for Prime Day this year falling where it did, which was kind of a strange timing where it's not in the summer, it's not kind of the kickoff to back to school that it's traditionally been. It's in the end of June, which is corresponding with a lot of economies reopening. People are having their discretionary funds. They're being used for travel. They're being used for restaurants. They're being used for brick and mortar retail, where people just want to go out and shop and look at goods and go to the mall and be around people. I think a lot of those things are factoring into kind of the general lack of perhaps record-breaking excitement that we typically see around a Prime Day holiday. So those are some of the macro numbers, macro factors that we've kind of observed with our client base, and I think can be kind of used to explain maybe some of the scenarios we saw over the Prime Day period.
Yeah, I think that's important context. Let's highlight a couple of these kind of specific things then within that general context. So talk to me about products that were promoted via best deal or prime discount.
Yeah, so the products we saw that actually performed well, and I think this is kind of where we can get into more of the micro details of performance. When we look at a brand who typically performs in Prime Day, in the past what we've seen is the products that were promoted either via advertising or best deal or Prime Day prime discount promotion saw extraordinary performance. But in conjunction with that, there was a lot of halo effect that affected the rest of their catalog that might not necessarily have been promoted. And I think the distinction with this Prime Day period is that halo effect wasn't really experienced. So products that weren't either advertised heavily, weren't promoted via Best Deal or PDP, just didn't see that level of increase that we've seen in the past. Now, products that were advertised, they were on Best Deal, they were on Prime Day promotion, which is getting harder and harder to participate in, which is kind of a side note. Those products actually did see a pretty legitimate bounce, and I think it's more in line with what we'd expect with the traditional Prime Day period.
Interesting. So we basically saw less of a kind of rising tide lifts all boats phenomenon, which we've seen in past Prime Days, and more from a consumer behavior standpoint, kind of a targeted approach to shopping where they are still going after the deals, but they're kind of spending, we saw this engagement, they're spending less time on the site. There's probably spending less time kind of browsing and bouncing around and just buying random things because it's a big shopping holiday. And more like, hey, I want a deal on this. I'm going to wait for the deal. I'm going to buy it on deal. But there's less of that kind of other activity that just generally surrounds the holiday in past years. Is that a good way of phrasing it?
I think that's the perfect way to phrase it. The rising tide lift all boats analogy, I think, is something we've really enjoyed. Our clients have enjoyed for years. And, hopefully in the future, the next Prime Day period, whenever that may be scheduled, we see a kind of a rebound. I would expect to see maybe a little bit of a rebound in that regard, but this year was definitely something that phenomenon did not come to fruition as it has in the past.
Okay, cool. So then to close out the Prime Day Insights section of this, I know we have some data listed here. Do we have a source on this? If not, we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah. So this we got from some just industry analysts. This was from Bank of America, these numbers. So they were estimations based on a variety of inputs they had. And I think without listing the specific numbers that we had detailed, I think that the interesting breakdown in the data is really looking just at as kind of the growth from the Prime Day period 2021 versus 2020, where the increase in last fall's sale period was about a 37% increase, 30 to 40% if we get more vague, since the numbers aren't official, from 2019's period to 2020's period, and then looking at 2021 to 2020, it was more in the 5 to 10% range. So I think, granted, it's an estimation, but I think that kind of tells the story where, yes, it's still a record-breaking day, but the growth was just much more muted than it has been in the past.
Yeah. So. Okay, that's great. And just to share these specific numbers, and I'm rounding a little bit here, but gross merchandise sales totaled $11.2 billion worldwide, up 7.6% from $10.4 billion during last year's Prime Day, which again was in October. So that changes things as well. So, to your point, still drove $11 billion worth of sales, which is obviously a very big number, still grew versus last year, which is still impressive. But, are we seeing the Prime Day become kind of less of an important holiday, or is it just hitting some sort of natural plateau where you still drive a lot of volume, but it's not necessarily going to compound every year? Exactly. I think both of those arguments could be made. Honestly, I think we'll know a lot more next year because I think there's a lot of things that you mentioned earlier that are very specific to, everyone coming out of their COVID caves is very counter to sitting at home buying things on the internet. Like,
absolutely,
out with their friends, they're traveling, they're seeing movies, they're doing all these things. None of those really fit with I'm going to sit at home by myself and shop online.
Hey there, I'm Dave Zimmerman with Orca Pacific. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to let you know this episode is brought to you by Orca Pacific, a Mighty Hive company. We're a full-service agency exclusively focused on Amazon with capabilities for everything a brand needs to succeed on the platform. From advertising strategy, content development and SEO, to merchandising and marketing. If it relates to driving and converting demand on the platform, our dedicated teams are leaders in this space. Our robust suite of services includes expertise on the back end as well, from operational support, demand forecasting and planning, to the right fulfillment options, and higher level strategies like long-term planning, channel management, and access to beta programs. To learn more, visit our website at www.orcapac.com. That's ORCAPAC.com. And a business development manager will get you up to speed on how we can accelerate your Amazon business. Now, back to the show.
We have a few other updates in kind of the general section. I know this is something a lot of people are going to be familiar with, but continued container shortage and increased freight costs.
I threw this in here because this is something that, frankly, our clients are asking a lot about. I think there is comfort in knowing that you're not alone in this specific experience, and so I thought it was worth discussing with you today, just to kind of have that broad discussion that yes, anyone who's manufacturing products overseas, specifically in China, are experiencing all of these issues with limited container availability and thus really, really high freight costs. So that is something we're seeing across the board with our clients, again, specifically those that manufacture in China. And we've had some conversations with brands, and there's a lot of speculation that we expect to see similar behavior, or I should say not an improvement in that front until sometime next year after Chinese New Year. I think it kind of is what it is at this point, and the relief will come sometime in 2022. So for now, I think we're in this kind of period where there's going to be constrained inventory. Brands are going to have a lot of discretion of where they spend their advertising and their promotional dollars because of that precious inventory they do have in-house and domestically here in the United States.
Okay, great. Last update in the general section, 3 new FCs opened in June.
Yeah, Amazon opens FCs all the time. There was notification over this weekend. I think they're opening at least 4 more in July. I think it's an important thing to add when we talk about Prime Day and we talk about maybe a little bit of a sluggish growth. Amazon doesn't anticipate any slowing down on their end. If they're opening 7 FCs in an 8-week period, with continued plans through the balance of the year, it is something to take notice of, and just from a macro level, understand that Amazon has no anticipation to slow down, and they're going to be navigating this new economic situation that we're in post-COVID, and with the issues overseas that we previously discussed.
Cool. All right, moving on to the content catalog section. So we have 2 updates here. The first is some efforts, continued efforts around on the Amazon platform.
Yeah. So Amazon late May released their brand protection report, basically highlighting the work that they've done to protect the integrity of their platform. They highlight 3 things in this report that I kind of want to call out that I think are it's the easiest way to consume. Frankly, they've put a lot of investment into a variety of tools. And I think you can bucketize those tools into 2 groups. One is machine learning and AI that they've instigated on their end to be able to catch bad actors, see poor trends in the data, in the seller base, in their client catalogs, to understand where some of these issues are coming up, where counterfeit products are being listed. So they're tools that Amazon can use to try and proactively defend the site from this phenomena. Secondly, powerful tools for brands to use from a self-service standpoint. Transparency, brand registry, Project Zero, to name 3. Those they highlighted heavily in that report, and those tools that we've experienced on our side from the agency view, from a brand view, those are becoming more robust, they're becoming more actionable, and they're becoming more useful. I think we're seeing more actual headway made when we are able to identify bad actors or counterfeit goods. Using those tools that Amazon's provided has really created a situation where we can actually make a change. It isn't the be-all, end-all, it's not the silver bullet, but I would say there's definitely improvement in those tools over, let's say, 2019, 2020. We're seeing a lot more headway in that front using the tools that Amazon provides us. And then thirdly, the report really calls out a step up in legal enforcement and using the law enforcement system in the United States to really take to task people who are bad actors, who are violating law. And I think in the past that might not have been something that was so public. You hear stories about maybe some of the really large enterprise brands that would get into a legal battle with someone who is producing goods in a counterfeit way. But I think now highlighting with this report that you can see Amazon is taking that much more seriously and using that more widespread within the catalog and within their platform.
Okay, that's great, and that's great to hear. I'm going to go off script here. I said we have two, but I'm actually going to add in a third because this sort of jogged my memory, and it's a quick one. It's around review, gray market, black market review practices. So some folks may have seen headlines on this. Amazon, and a lot of this happened in June, some of it happened in May, but Amazon basically started shutting off major third-party sellers that were violating their review policy, which is an unprecedented action for them. Typically, they would do a lot of kind of hand-wringing, but not necessarily direct enforcement on the large 8-figure, in some cases 9-figure sellers. Over the last 30, 45 days, they've shut off dozens of 8 and 9-figure sellers, mostly Asian import companies, but with significant kind of brand presence and scale at this point, and basically seemingly overnight shut them down to manipulating reviews on the platform. So that's an interesting, not directly related to this counterfeit conversation, as they're obviously different practices, but a general sort of macro view is Amazon is taking legal and kind of regulatory and self-enforcement, I would say, more seriously than they ever have. Okay, cool. So third one then on our list. This is specific to a category, but for these folks that are in this category, I think it's important. So increased compliance requirements for dietary supplements.
Yeah, it's pretty it's focused here, but I think, again, it can be kind of a bellwether of other things that are happening on the platform, and specifically within dietary supplements for those who participate in that category. It's always been a difficult endeavor. There's a lot of requirements. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of documentation that's needed. And Amazon released notifications in late June that they were going to increase that even further. So brands that are participating in that category will need to resubmit or submit, if they haven't already, certain compliance documents that are required by Amazon. So that's something we want to make sure that clients are checking from a compliance standpoint, that if there's notifications in their portal, if there's emails being communicated, that stuff is taken very seriously. And I put this in also just to kind of bring it up a level, that this is something we're seeing in all categories. It's highlighted by this very specific category. Obviously, it's something that's consumed by humans, so it's going to be more regulated than most. But across our client base, we're seeing a lot more scrutiny on compliance, just across the board. A lot of pesticide notifications. I'm sure those who are listening who are actively selling on Amazon know exactly what I'm talking about. So this kind of ties it again even further up to the conversation we're talking about counterfeit and reviews. Amazon is really taking the integrity of their platform very seriously, and that's the main, that's going to be their main focus. And so, as a brand participating, you have to make sure that you have, your ducks in a row, so to speak, to be able to combat and provide that information and combat, possible listing shutdown. Should Amazon communicate that certain things are needed to make those listings and support those listings going forward. So again, I think it's important to call out that this isn't something that's going to go away. It's not going to get easier to list supplements. It's not going to get easier to list even hard lines. So for brands out there, it's really something to take really to heart and make sure you just have everything lined up and ready to submit when you want to go live with a new product.
Okay, cool. All right. Last section here is advertising. We have 2 updates under the advertising category. The first, and we'll kind of circle back to Prime Day here, but specific to advertising, Prime Day results on the advertising side of things.
Yeah. So, I was thinking of possibly roping this into our earlier discussion, but the data here that we saw on the advertising side from Prime Day really just kind of supports the more anecdotal information and observations that we discussed earlier. Conversions over the 2-day period of Prime Day, so a couple weeks back, the activity and impressions were up about 3 to 5% across our client base over the average 2-day period experienced in 2021. So again, a slight bump, right? We are seeing both from a paid and organic standpoint that there was an increased level of activity on the site. However, 3 to 5% is what we really experienced when you compare it to the more standard time period over the rest of the year. I think the most important thing to call out from an advertising standpoint is just the impressions. Impressions and general engagement with the platform were way down, almost 40% compared to what it was in October of last year during the Prime Day period of 2020. So again, looking at that real raw data that comes from Amazon, that's something that you can directly point to some of the observations we had. So conversions were up and click-through rates were strong. So the efficiencies were good from an advertising standpoint, but I think it was just a general decrease in traffic than what brands were led to expect or really were anticipating for this period. So from an advertising standpoint, the data kind of supports, it's kind of the proof in the pudding, as it were, for what we're discussing earlier.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. All right. Last update for this month, new brand store link on sponsored brand video ads.
Yeah, I thought this one was pretty cool. We noticed this late in the month that Amazon sponsored brand video ads was now adding a link to that particular brand's Amazon stores page, which is great because I think we're seeing the evolution of the Amazon store in the ecosystem, and we're seeing it become more and more crucial to a brand's success and kind of the holistic approaches they sell on the platform. Previously, when stores first roll out, they're kind of a secondary thing. Yeah, let's set that up. Amazon's giving us our own private space on the website. That makes a ton of sense to utilize that. But it was kind of, an afterthought, maybe a lower priority issue. But as we move forward and we're into, mid 2020 now, Q3, this is something that brands really need to take advantage of. And you can see by this update to brand video that if Amazon's linking directly back to that page, that's something that really needs to be buttoned up and used with a strategic mindset to grow your catalog, to highlight certain products, updated seasonally to reflect certain product sets or anticipate certain sale periods. So again, I think it's just another thing that we'll probably see more of through the rest of this year is other ways that Amazon can kind of link everything together for a specific brand and get that engagement and keep that customer engaged and kind of in that brand ecosystem within the Amazon platform.
All right. Sounds good. Well, that ends our e-commerce deep dive show. For those of you listening to the recording, we will see you next month. For those that are sticking around for the Q&A, we'll begin that in a second.